Welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, Town Destroyer, Victor Arnautoff and the Art of Controversy. I'm Susan Ives, Director of Communications for the Living New Deal, a nonprofit founded at UC Berkeley that's popularizing the idea of a new New Deal. Our mission is to preserve the New Deal's legacy by making people aware of what the New Deal was and did, and to promote the New Deal as a model of good government. Our website, livingnewdeal.org, has documented more than 17,000 New Deal sites across the country and is an ever-expanding resource for learning about New Deal policies, programs, and the people who led the nation through the Great Depression. If you haven't as yet, you can sign up to receive our monthly newsletter, The Fireside, and invitations to upcoming events and public programs like this one. We'll be hearing tonight from documentary filmmakers Deborah Kaufman and Alan Snitow. Their award-winning films have appeared at major film festivals, on PBS, and at screenings around the world. They include Company Town, Between Two Worlds, Thirst, Secrets of Silicon Valley, Blacks and Jews, and Town Destroyer, the subject of tonight's webinar. The mural at George Washington High School, painted by the Russian-born artist Victor Arnautoff in 1936, under the auspices of the Federal Art Project, has been a lightning rod for controversy. The 1,600 square foot artwork covers the walls and ceiling of the school's main entrance and includes the image of a dead Native American, as well as a scene of George Washington and the people he enslaved. In 2019, the San Francisco Board of Education voted unanimously to paint over the mural, which some parents claimed was traumatizing to students. The board later would vote instead to cover up the murals with panels. A lawsuit by the school's Alumni Association prevented the board from doing so. The court ruled the board had failed to conduct environmental review as required by California law. Then some members of the board were replaced through a recall. And just last summer, the new board rescinded the earlier decision to cover up the mural. This story is chronicled in Deborah and Alan's film, Town Destroyer. You can join the conversation by writing your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen for Deborah and Alan to address following their presentation. The program will also be recorded and posted to the Living New Deal's website, YouTube page, and on Facebook. We hope you enjoy tonight's program. Your donations make our work and programs like this available to everyone free of charge, and we are grateful for your support. Now, please welcome Deborah Kaufman and Alan Snitow.
Good evening, and thank you to the Living New Deal and to all of you who are watching, Susan Ives and others who have made this possible. We're so happy to be with you to talk about the film.
So thank you very much. So we'll just, I suppose, start in here a little bit. Or did you have a question, Susan?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So, well, just very briefly to start off about why we did this film. Town Destroyer is the name of the film because during the Revolutionary War, George Washington ordered an attack on a number of Haudenosaunee nations that were siding with the British, and his orders said that that his troops should destroy and devastate the villages and crops of the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois. And after that, the Seneca, one of the groups in the Iroquois nations, called him Town Destroyer. That was the name that he was given. And Hanadagayas is in the language. And so we thought this was an appropriate title, given the fact that this is a movie that had so many different elements to it, that it was about art, about current politics, about how we look at history, how people interpret art, whether they can deal with symbols, and also all the discussions that now exist about questions of trauma and triggers, and the reactions that are going on in terms of many students to feeling unsafe in their schoolroom situations and elsewhere. And so we thought it was overdetermined that we should try to address some of these topics. And obviously there's a lot going on in a film of this kind.
And I think with that, what we should do is just start with the trailer to give you a sense of the degree of conflict that existed in San Francisco as a result of this mural. So go ahead.
My son, I can't imagine him walking into that school being told, meet me at the dead Indian. It's not right.
Our children deserve to come to a school where they feel honored and respected.
The right to learn without hostile environments.
Generational trauma follows us.
Victor Arnautoff was one of the most prolific New Deal artists in San Francisco.
Those murals was a critique on American history.
A very early attempt to reframe our understanding of the infallible nature of our founding fathers.
At the moment of its creation, as anti-racist as anything could possibly be. But at some point, the intentions of the artist don't matter. It's about how it's received.
Today is a good day to end white supremacy. We Indigenous people are not exotic people of paint and feathers to be ogled at.
Paint it down.
The definition of trauma is that it is a repetition. It can seem mundane. Cumulatively, it can lead to real harm.
We have to be really careful. Trauma becomes the easy way to justify the erasure of things you just don't like.
This is a slippery slope. If you censor these murals, where do we stop?
Don't cover them up. Let people see them. Let's build an educational curriculum that responds to it.
What is behind trying to pit seemingly progressive allies against each other? This is identity politics gone off the rails.
I'm a licensed psychologist. The trauma is real.
They don't have a rational argument.
Art gets in the mind. It deals with the mind.
So I'll just add to that bit of intensity there that our introduction to this story was through the school board hearings, which were taking place over the summer of 2019. We had not seen the murals. What we had seen was an incredible debate at the level of the San Francisco Unified School District School Board over these murals. And it was only later, and after many attempts to get into the school, which is kind of like a fortress, that we were able to get in and actually see these incredible, huge murals that dominate the space of the school, 13 panels, as Susan mentioned, that are basically the main masterpiece of Victor Arnautoff's work over his lifetime, although he's done a lot of other work in San Francisco. And we thought we would show some slides of his work and just briefly talk about some of the elements of them. The first and most critical painting in terms of the controversy is this one, huge in the center of the school, the dead Indian in the center being the major source of controversy in 2019 because of the effect that it was having on families of Native origin and others in the community.
One thing about that image is that it is life-size, it's at eye level, and it's at the dead center of the school. It is, geographically in the middle. So it's someplace that you can't miss. You can't go around that image. It's sort of a shocking provocation that Arnautoff did in an extraordinary way at this period of time in 1936, when issues of genocide against Native people were very barely taught at all, and especially in California, where the issue of genocide against Native Americans was completely wiped from the educational system.
So in the next slide, what you see is kind of a more focused look at settlers walking over the dead Indian. And they're done in gray. One of the people we interviewed said they were soulless men, which we think, and many people who have written about it think that this is, a clear indication of Arnautoff's thoughts about George Washington's culpability with sending these soulless men to literally step over the bodies of Native people.
And Arnautoff's biographer, Robert Cherney, talks about this as the tradition of grisaille, and I think is pronouncing it right, where you intentionally gray certain kinds of figures as a commentary about what you think about them, in this case, the murderers of the person at their feet.
And in the next slide, to the right, is a peace pipe being shared between a Native American of a fantasy tribe and Anglo settler, and right above them is a broken branch, and that is taken to mean be a symbol of the broken treaty. So you see the peace pipe, but you see the broken branch. So you can see that just from this one panel, the degree of symbolism that Arnautoff is loading in each of these panels in the center of George Washington High School.
And above the broken branch is the city of San Francisco, so that it takes the thing from Washington's era to really to the present, or to his present at that time. The next one is moving to another major mural, and this is part of the Mount Vernon mural, in which Washington is being shown by his slave master, a man who is shucking corn, an enslaved person. He's shown in at his plantation. This again in 1936, people were not taught. In fact, for many, many years after, decades after that, people were not taught in school that Washington owned slaves. And the next slide is this is the 7-year war, the French-Indian War, but it really takes Washington from on the lower right, his being a surveyor, which was his actual job. He was surveying Indian land to turn it into settler real estate. And then beyond that are the battles with Native peoples and a number of the stories in which he figured. And in the center of that, we can go to the next slide, are two figures of Native people, two soldiers. There was a lot of objection to these figures, bare-chested, painted, and with scalps on their belts, as a stereotypical version of savagery.
Moving on to the next slide, you can see the scale of the work that he's doing in the lobby of this gigantic school. This is the panel relating to the revolution itself, with revolutionaries in the center, workers in the center, and George Washington as the general, successful, victorious general off onto the right. And events is the burning of the stamps, Stamp Act. The upper left, you see the people who were
Boston
colonists actually dressed as Indians, throwing tea for the Boston Tea Party. But you're getting a sense here of the scale of the work. And in the last slide, next, you'll see just a picture of us in production with our cameraman Vicente Franco underneath one of the central murals.
Give you a sense of the size of these things. And we'll show you some more pictures of some of the smaller panels of the mural later as we go on. One of the things that we wanted to deal with in the film was to look at the artist, look at the art, look at the reactions to the art, get some sense of why this particular piece was so controversial and such a provocation. Partially because also there are in almost every school and public building in California, there are lots of images of Native people. And the images are almost always condescending and insulting. You'll have Junipero Serra patting Indians on the head in this school, in Mission High School, and many of the other high schools. There are images of Serra, who was the founder of the mission system in California, which enslaved and converted many Native people in the state of California. So we wanted to see why Arnautoff took the track that he did. And so why don't we show you a little piece of the film.
With an interview with Robin Kelly from UCLA, a history professor there that we worked with before, who does a lot of work around the connections between cultural events and cultural workers and American history. And so why don't we roll the clip as Robin Kelly talks about Victor Arnautoff.
The Nation invited me to write a piece about the Life of Washington mural by Victor Arnautoff. And I began to just dig into the story behind it. And I realized that most of the complaints were not coming from the students. They're coming from various groups, some indigenous groups, some African-American groups. But then there's this other piece. We had to find out who's Victor Arnautoff. Like, where'd he come from? What are his politics? Victor Arnautoff has interesting, colorful history. Russian emigre, ends up coming to San Francisco to study art. And who does he study with? He studies with Diego Rivera, the great left-wing muralist. And that's how he becomes a muralist. And he begins to make these amazing murals that are consistent with the times in the 1930s. That is, popular front politics, leftist politics. He's making work about the unemployed, about labor. And so by the time he is selected to do this mural at George Washington High School, he's a well-known leftist. You ask the question, well, do we actually know what it means to be a communist artist in 1935? Well, when you start to dig into that question, you discover that to be a communist artist in the age of the Popular Front means to elevate the Founding Fathers and to claim them as somehow representing a radical democratic tradition. The other narrative is that George Washington is our hero. You can't destroy a mural of George Washington. He's the founder of the country.
And it goes on to talk a little bit more about George Washington and his relationship with Native Americans. But one of the things that we learned that we didn't know about was that there was also a history at the school of conflict in the 1960s over the mural, but it wasn't about George Washington and Native Americans. It was about the image of the slave shucking corn that we showed you. And at the time, the Black Power movement was happening in the late 1960s, early 70s, and the school came to the conclusion in the school district that it would be good to do an alternative mural and another mural rather than paint the thing over. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to show resistance, empowerment, a different story about African Americans. And a local artist was chosen at the time, very young, named Dewey Crumpler, to do this mural. And we found him in Oakland. He's been a professor at the San Francisco Art Institute for many years, feels very strongly about saving the murals at George Washington High School, the Arnautoff murals being, he says, very connected to his alternative panel of murals, which are immediately adjacent to Arnautoff's murals at the school. And we'll show you some pictures now of Dewey and his murals that were painted in the early 70s as response murals to Arnautoff.
So this is Dewey himself, and as he would emphasize that that resilience is a key portion, message also, not just resistance, but resilience in both issues that Native Americans are also concerned with, that they not just be taken as victims. So, and let's go to the next. We'll show you the murals themselves. These are the 3 murals that he made in response. You can see, and the one in the back, and we can go to that one maybe a little closer. And the next slide. The idea here was that these were chains, and this is Dewey standing in front of the mural, examining it very carefully. The idea of breaking the chains which were in Arnautoff's murals being welded together, where the genocide is shown, the enslavement is shown, and here the response mural is the liberation. The resistance, the resilience is being emphasized, something that our executive producer, Peggy Berryhill, who's a Muskogee, also emphasized in our making of the film, that we should not be only emphasizing one aspect of victimization, but also of resilience, of survival, of survivance, as it's called sometimes. And let's go to the next picture. This one is sort of the Asian American mural that he painted. And then the next one is the Latino and Native American mural. And in this case, you see the Native figure lifting Alcatraz Island out of the earth. And this Dewey was a reference to the battle that was going on at Alcatraz in the early 70s in order to be able to create a free zone for Indians of all nations at that time, the resistance at Alcatraz.
So we have a clip of Dewey visiting the school and talking to us about all the artwork in the school, not just his own and Victor Arnautoff's. So you can see in this clip what was going on with the New Deal and the WPA at the time in terms of supporting artists in this way in this school. So let's roll that clip.
This school is one of the most unique schools in America in that it has artwork that spans from the very early part of the 20th century all the way to now. And that this school, unlike many, has that kind of artistic breadth. And all of the work in the buildings, including Sergeant Johnson's, are among the great works in America. And it's so horrible that they have been neglected. At first, I was incensed with this. But once I really understood in a much more sophisticated way how the language of art operates, and in this case, you can see that he is looking not at these people. He is looking into the future. That's why his eyes are pointed away. My body is here, but my mind is liberated. And that's where he is.
So one of the things in making the film that was important for us in doing our research was to try to really delve into the kinds of things, the grievances that Native parents and educators were expressing. about the murals and about Native history in California. And while we were actually doing this work, just before we were doing this research, a book came out by Benjamin Madley called American Genocide, which really traces the genocide in California as being a classic example coming out of the history of the Holocaust. Classic example of federally and state-funded annihilation of Native peoples. But with that grievance of that time, there was also, partially as a result of it, a mythology that enraged people, that the idea that they didn't exist, that they had evaporated, that they'd all been wiped out, and that Native people in California encounter this all the time. And so sometimes when you think about efforts to paint over a mural as a kind of cancel culture, sometimes the people who want to do things like that feel that they have been canceled themselves, and that is a very powerful set of grievances that they bring into this situation. And we really wanted to understand what that history was about and what that was, to bring some reality to it, to recognize people on both sides of what was going on in this discussion, rather than just recapitulate the arguments over and over again. And so one of the people that we talked to about the trauma of the gold rush and of the missions of boarding schools, which had poisoned in some ways public education for many Native people, because for 100 years, Native children were kidnapped and taken to boarding schools, and sometimes very far away from their homes. So we wanted to talk with, and we went to a talk to an artist named Judith Lowry. She's Pitt River at Maidu, living in the center of where the gold rush Holocaust against Native people took place, where the $5 a scalp bounty was being paid by the state of California to wipe out Native people. And we wanted to talk with her about her art, her use of symbolism, how to interpret her own symbols, but also how to look at the art of Victor Arnautoff from a Native perspective. And so let's give you a little section of the film on that.
This is the wildfire, which we've just come through the worst summer with the Dixie Fire and taking out much of my homelands up in Plumas and Lassen County. So I envisioned the destruction of the roundhouse. The roundhouse is the main character in all of these pictures. I use symbolism a lot myself. And again, that's the Renaissance. If you decode the Primavera, I mean, there's so much, especially when they cleaned it, all of a sudden, so much more content and narrative that they knew. All the flowers and there's nothing that didn't have a reason to be there that wasn't symbolic. And again, I think this artist might have been using some symbolism to subvert the narrative a little bit, more sympathetic to the Native side of things. I mean, Washington was a surveyor that saw this as his real estate, mapping out the country. So it sort of symbolizes the initiation of the dicing up of our continent. When I look at that dead Indian, I put myself in the place of the artist while he was actually creating it. First thing I notice is the Indian is prone. He's not supine. So his identity has been protected, I think. I don't think you can paint a dead person, especially one that's been victimized, and not feel some kind of compassion. So my feeling is in this mural, especially in the black and white people, the ones without souls, if you really look at it, it really tells the story the right way. These people were stepped on. They were robbed of their country. It's saying that. So I think the artist created a little subversion within his work. It's not the first time that's happened. So if they just reinterpret it, I think they should leave it.
One of the great things about doing this kind of documentary is we got to interview people like Judith and curators, museum directors, people who think about art, Native and non-native people who are really interested in history and our relationship to history, and how these questions are so relevant today in terms of who gets to tell the story. Is the impact of the art more important than the intention of the artist? On all of the difficulties and problems that are created by this kind of work and how it's being seen today. But an interesting person that we spoke with early in the making of the film was the director at Stanford of the Stanford Native American Cultural Center, who said, you know, it's great you're making this film, but one thing that would be really great to try to do is to break the binary, to try to get beyond or transcend just the argument, to be able to consider the questions carefully and listen carefully to everyone and everyone's story. And we hope that we did that with the film. And so far, the few screenings that we've had since its opening last month, we've been able to have those discussions with our audience in a very productive way. We're very happy about that.
One of the other points that we wanted to look at in the film was the changing definition of what an ally is or what an alliance is. In a lot in recent times, there's been a sense that when you're an ally, you should be doing what you're told by the oppressed who need assistance and need support. And that's a different conception than in the period of the New Deal or in the period of the civil rights movement and labor movement, when there were different constituencies that had their own interests that allied, even if they disagreed on many things, because they could agree on certain things, and they had their interests, and those interests had to be recognized. And so those kind of alliances and coalitions is a different model than sometimes what people are talking about now. And I think that since we are facing really something really even worse than Father Coughlin's threat in the 1930s, in terms of a kind of fascist movement, not even a kind of fascist movement, an increasingly clear fascist movement in this country, that serious coalitions of people who disagree are really going to be important in the future. And that was one of the themes also that we were trying to bring forward with a film which sort of ends with the idea that there's no one who can tell the story alone, that we are incomplete, that everyone has to participate in telling the story. And that's sort of an aim that we were trying to make with this film that breaks the binary. So one other element that I just wanted to raise, we can put up a picture of Bob Cherney's book, which we highly recommend, that it's called Victor Arnautoff and the Politics of Art. And Cherney is, sorry if I'm doing it out of order. It's a very useful reference for, there we go. And about the history of Arnautoff in general, taking him from being, when he was fighting against the Leninist forces in the Russian Revolution, his travels across China, where he was a cavalryman for a warlord in China, to the what became the San Francisco Art Institute, because he wanted to be an artist. A strange guy, Victor Arnautoff, a strange history.
But we think that he wanted to create a provocation with his art, and he certainly did. And having met his grandson at one of the screenings, the grandson said that, you know, he would be really happy that everyone's talking about his art with such passion decades and decades later. So with that, we're happy to take questions.
Well, thank you so much. I've seen the film like 3 times now, and every time I see it, I just see more and more. And it really is a very provocative way of approaching this subject. And just for starters, I'll start out. We do have some questions in the Q&A, but your approach was to present all sides or many sides of this issue rather than a single point of view. You don't really reveal your own. And I'm just wondering, you've talked a little bit about this, but what did you hope to achieve by taking that approach?
Well, I think that there's a lot of different reasons for this. We started off, I think, probably like most of our viewers right here, as being people who couldn't imagine covering up a mural by a communist from the New Deal that dealt with enslaved people and a very different history of Washington. We came to understand more questions of trauma that exist, or at least appreciate the points that were being made. And so we felt as if what we had to do was try to move the discussion onto a different plane. Right now, it was two groups of people who were really yelling at one another, and not two groups that should be, for the most part, in alliance. And we wanted to move beyond that, as Deborah was saying, breaking the binary. But it also trying to appreciate a sort of different aesthetic that exists now, especially among younger people, but also in the wake of the George Floyd assassination. The idea of lack of safety. And when we grew up, the idea when you went to school is you wanted to be free, you wanted to be liberated, you wanted to get out of school, you wanted to raise hell. And the idea of safety was not something that was high on our agenda. Whereas it is much more immediately important to kids in school now. And we had to take seriously that kids in school now are trained from the time they're about 6 in first grade, how to hide from active shooters, that there's a different atmosphere. Schools are really cut off from the community. There are guards. You can't get into the schools. It's really, they're a different kind of institution than they used to be. And so we were looking at education in this new way. So that was part of the thing that we were trying to deal with. We wanted to be able to confront people with the dueling realities that could be appreciated, and that people could perhaps sit around the table and try to understand one another.
I'd just say also that, our work in general is, we don't really make advocacy films. We're trying to, in all of our work, I think, kind of raise, multiple issues, take on multiple themes, and, just tell a good story. And so, this had the extra dimension of kind of undermining the current moment where, when you think of what's going on with school boards around the country, and thinking of efforts to protect children, what you're really hearing about is places like Tennessee and Florida, where they're banning books and, not letting kids read Toni Morrison or Mouse, or books about LGBTQ people. And so this was a really, sharply different situation that just lent itself to further exploration, because it didn't fit the paradigm. And I think that that's the kind of thing we're interested in our work, is kind of looking at more complex situations.
We're interested in conflict, not in affirmation.
Well, I would say also, not providing the answer, but rather raising questions. Our films are generally used in schools after broadcast. They're used in colleges, sometimes high schools, mostly universities and colleges, to raise questions and help people think things through. And
it was after the film screenings that we've done, both at the Mill Valley Film Festival, where it premiered, and then at the commercial run in San Francisco, the response was really intense discussion that until they chased us out of the theater. And that was sort of one of the aims. We felt as if that was an accomplishment, and the participants who liked the film were on both sides of the debate. We were very interested and intrigued by that.
Just wondering, what was your pre-production process? Did you work with a script, or did you just kind of let it unfold? How did you go about it?
Our films are largely made in the editing room. So we do a lot of research. One of our mentors, who is a elderly in his mid-90s now, filmmaker, told us that we read too many books, and told us, your next film you should read only one book. But this happened during COVID, so we read a library worth of books. We read a great deal, and that also turned up a number of really fantastic people that we wanted to talk to. People like the National Museum of the American Indian curator, and we wanted to go outside of the Bay Area in order to be able to get other opinions that were not ripped into this very divisive moment. And the result was that we traveled really around the country when each time COVID broke, we took the opportunity to pursue some element of our research, whether it was to Los Angeles, to the Great Wall of Los Angeles, which is an amazing half-mile-long mural, going to the National Museum of the American Indian, or what else?
Going up to the Gold Country to meet Judith Lowry. You know, it was, as Alan said, you know, we don't generally work with a script. We work, you know, we figure it out in the editing room. This can be problematic for filmmakers because, you know, when you're writing grant proposals to support your work, people want to know how the movie ends. And for us, we never know how it ends until we kind of get there. And so what's difficult for funding, I think, is better for the process in terms of being really open and keeping it. I think it's really important for a director to have an open mind and to learn from your subjects. And we continue to learn. I mean, part of the process of having this discussion or showing it at a film festival is learning from audiences, their thoughts. So we're done with the movie, but we're not done with our process around the issues.
Well, you said that you never really knew how it was going to end, and just wondering, it's a difficult film to really end because it seems like an ongoing kind of debate. And I'm just wondering, how did you decide to end it where you ended it?
Well, well, you know, we ended this without the issue being completely settled. You know, the idea for us to end it was to have something that we had wanted to do all the time, a serious discussion of what this question of trauma was all about, which is now part of the lingo, almost the pop culture, pop psychology, but also being dealt with very seriously by the Psychological Association. We talked with the person who wrote the definition of PTSD for the Psychological Association's manual. To end with that, but also to end with people having double feelings about these murals, and to end with both the difficulty of the art and also the incompletion of the story, that it can't be complete. And it actually, in reality, isn't complete because the situation with the murals is still up in the air. The school board was blocked from destroying the murals, but there was recently a new election in San Francisco in which one person who is in favor of destroying the murals was elected, making it so there could be a 4-3 majority once again to get rid of the murals. Now, I don't know whether or not they're actually going to bring this up again, because it would raise a new firestorm at a time when the San Francisco School Board has been the center of scandals and controversy, one controversy after another, and recall elections and so on. But nevertheless, these murals, I suppose in some sense, is a testament to how powerful they are as art, are going to remain a centerpiece of controversy into the future. no final resolution has taken place.
So what is the status of these murals at this point? You know, there's many murals around the country that raise questions like this that were done in the 1930s when there were different kinds of sensibilities than we've hopefully evolved to hold now. And these murals are under threat by people who find them offensive and want to censor them. Did you encounter other murals or consider other murals when you made this, or do you think this particular mural is emblematic of what's going on?
Well, I don't think it's emblematic because I think it's a lot better than most of them. I mean, this is, this is really, I think, a high example of New Deal art. It's really an important, a very important piece. There are controversies we know of going all over the country about this, and some demands for covering up or painting over, elsewhere. And I think that this is sort of a permanent state. There's been a real change in the way progressives really think about art. It used to be, and this is the element that Arnautoff represents, the idea of exposing the atrocities, exposing the evil, the downside as well as the upsides of American history, and not doing the I suppose it was Lynn Cheney's version of history, just all positive kind of thing. And now there's much more people who were silenced in the past from oppressed groups and people who felt marginalized, articulating that they don't want to be represented anymore by pictures of their victimization. They want to see themselves in resistance. The Black students in the 1960s, they were saying they wanted images that were more violent of the resistance, of rebellions against slavery. In the case of the Native Americans, there was the view that, yes, we understand the genocide that took place, but why should we have to pass by images of our victimization every day in order for you white people to be educated about what happened in history? Now, I mean, there's no easy resolution to these questions, and you can discuss them in many different forms and with different pieces of art, and which we like to do.
But it is to your question, Susan, it is the cultural moment, and I think there's built post offices and buildings all over the country where this art is currently being contested and will continue to be contested as our values change and questions shift and people ask, who should tell the story? Who gets to tell the story of American history? I mean, this is, a fundamental question that is complicated, and we need to open up that dialogue and have that dialogue.
And just one other thing about Arnautoff's work, for example, he's got a number of post office works, I think in Texas, can't remember exactly, I think it's in Texas, which would be very controversial now because it is African-American sharecroppers picking cotton. And for Arnautoff, he was representing workers, the laboring people. Picking cotton, it doesn't feel good to a lot of people these days in terms of an image of African-American history and African-American work.
Yeah, there were a number of very prominent writers and actors. Danny Glover was one, Alice Walker was another, who came out against the censorship of these murals, kind of seeing them as a teachable moment. And yet, were there equally prominent people on the other side of the issue, people who really thought the murals should be censored or covered over? that you were aware of? And how did you choose the people that you interviewed to include in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, there are people on all sides of this debate. There's also a lot of people who are undecided. I mean, a lot of people have doubt and feel a lot of pain about the way the conversation is unfolding and the antipathies and the bullying on both sides. The people who are, absolutely puritanical anti-censorship people and others. I mean, the head of the local Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the native people of this area, is for painting them over. So that's an important person. I mean, that's a very important person. That's the community that's here. He's not a celebrity like Danny Glover, but what I think was important for us to show was that the diversity of opinion inside the Native American community and inside the non-Native community. I mean, it doesn't really fall out as it's a Native versus Anglo or white battle. In some ways, we saw this as a generational battle, that older people kind of understood the opportunity to teach the murals, that this was a learning opportunity. We heard this from a Choctaw elder who is in the film, actually, who says, this is showing what happened. This is a teachable moment. Whereas younger people just feel like, well, if one person is traumatized by walking by this mural, then it should come down, because you don't want to be harming the community of students. So part of it is just, the language, the terms of debate that are being used, and it's not as obvious or clear as you might believe it would be.
And this the question of teachable moments is complicated when it comes to the murals. One thing we noticed, we talked to a lot of graduates from WASH, as George Washington High School is called familiarly, and who have no memory of the murals. They don't remember them at all. They walk by them every day. And if you're in high school, you've got a lot of other things on your mind. So, you don't necessarily look at these things unless you actually feel that you're implicated. In other words, if I'm not sure how happy I would be, for example, if my kids were every day walking past a mural with a artistic representation of Buchenwald. So there's that sort of part of the issue. And there's also the question of how things can be taught. Paul Chott-Smith, the National Museum of American Indian curator, expressed what a lot of people have expressed to us, which is they're not confident in the school's ability to actually make a teachable moment. Yeah. That it takes an enormous amount of effort and concentration to do that, and especially in a school of 2,500 students, to actually make it so that kids actually learn about this, take it in, and make that learning real. These are real. Real questions. There's a lot to be taught in this mural. You could spend a semester learning about both art and the history of art in this mural.
Or you could watch our 1 hour long movie and learn a lot. We're hoping that our film is the teachable moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that there were a little technical problems in some of the photographs, and I want to acknowledge that, and we'll clean that up when we get this film, this particular program online, and we apologize if people found that distracting. There's a lot of questions here. One of the points of view for a hoped for outcome of this controversy was that the murals would be used as a teaching tool at the school, that they would be interpreted and discussed by the students and teachers themselves. And I'm wondering if you know the status of that.
What we've heard is that at one of our screenings, a history teacher at Washington said that she was teaching about the murals. And and hopes to invite the film to be shown at the high school. At another screening, a native alumna of Washington stood up and talked about and started to cry about her memory of going by the mural every day and not getting any acknowledgement of what it was about or of her feelings about it. You know, this is, I think that there is an effort now to do more to use the murals to address some of these issues. And
we hope there will be, but currently it's not like the school assembly or incoming freshmen are taught about them. It's just individual, currently it's just individual teachers taking their students to look at them and talk about them and write about them for their classes. Primarily, I think, history and art history classes.
Thanks, yeah. Well, there's just a lot of interest in seeing the film, and I wonder where your film's going to be shown, and can you give anybody some dates or insights into when they can go see the whole thing?
Well, this is the fate of independent filmmakers. We make a film to our own specifications that fulfills for us what we think are the most important elements of what is going on. And we work with artists and wonderful editor Gregory Sharp and cinematographers. And then we have to sell it once people can see it. So we have a wonderful educational distributor, Bullfrog Films, that will be getting the film out in the coming months. But in the meantime, we are pushing for a public television broadcast, but we have nothing to announce on that front. There will be at film festivals. We hope to be doing some screenings at museums and art institutes, as well as in film festivals. But we're only just sort of rolling this out. One of the things is when you're a sort of marginal cottage industry, the way our work is, you don't have promoters and a whole crew of people working on the distribution. We start really getting going on distribution after we're done, because it's an all-encompassing process. So we'll have to keep you posted on that.
I think
to our website.
Yeah, our website is being posted in the chat, and I think that we'll be announcing what happens with the film on our website, but also bullfrogfilms.com will have the film to be sending out to universities and museums in the springtime, early spring. That'll be available. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan and Deborah. This is a very provocative conversation. I wish we had more time. And a very timely film. Thank you so much for bringing it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
People are interested in knowing more about murals, endangered murals, where they are. Please go to the Living New Deal website at livingnewdeal.org. And before we go, just a quick reminder, next Tuesday, December 6th, 5 p.m. Pacific time, we have a webinar called Reality Makes Them Dream that explores New Deal photography that you may not be familiar with. Presenters are Emmy Mixacabbages. She's a curator for the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And Josie Johnson is a curator at the Cantor Center for the Arts at Stanford University. And they're going to be talking about some of the lesser known New Deal photographers and their remarkable, sometimes surreal images. And on December 7th, next Wednesday, the Living New Deal New York will be hosting a roundtable called The Battle Between Memory and Forgetting, drawing connections between the COVID-19 pandemic and the Great Depression. And you can register for these talks at our website. We hope to see you next week, and we want to thank you again for joining tonight's conversation and for your support of the Living New Deal. And special thanks, of course, to Alan and Deb. Your generosity makes our work possible, and we really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for coming, and good night.